may have seen me make these over on live stream, but I don't think I've ever showed you each one of the steps and where my process all comes from. I already have my favorite painting clothes on. You can tell that they're my favorite painting clothes because I have a paint stain on my waistband, but don't let that bother you. We may get a little bit messy. But we're gonna have a lot of fun. So come along on this little journey with me and I hope you enjoy it. The first step of my painting process is always picking my colors. I do like to work in fairly cohesive, predetermined color palettes, and today I'm feeling a little bit blue. When it comes to mixing paints, I do like to do it on what's called a wet palette. Acrylic paints are notoriously fast drying, so that's where a wet palette just comes in handy because it works off a special piece of paper and damp sponge underneath. So it keeps your paints wet and ready to use for weeks on end. And we're gonna do quite a decent amount of that color. And to add some shade depth to it, we're also going to mix some turquoise, as well as a more dark blue shade. Now, I always like to add the complementary color into whatever color I'm mixing up, just because it adds a little bit of interest and it also takes out some of the vibrancy of the color. These paints can be very vibrant coming straight out of the tube. And while that can be good in certain applications, it's not really my style to use super bright colors. Since one of the shades we are making is going to be a light blue, I'm going to go in and scoop out a decent amount of white. I'm going to take half of the blue as well as a little bit of the turquoise and some of the white paint, and then a tiny little speck of our orange to mix in. Mixing paint is probably one of my favorite parts of this whole process. I just find it so relaxing and satisfying to have a color in your head and be able to bring it into reality. I also have a board behind me with some magnets, so we're gonna go ahead and put up our newspaper and start the collage making process. An important thing to keep in mind about making collage papers is you're not looking to create a finished painting on a single sheet of paper. You're just looking to create some interesting shapes and textures, and it really doesn't matter what the entire sheet looks like because you're going to be breaking it up and ripping the paper and making just small little parts of each sheet. So I'm gonna go in with my favorite tool, which is the Catalyst Wedge, and I'm just going to smudge around some paint and hopefully we can start building up those layers. This is my favorite tool to use just because of all of the really cool grungy textures you can achieve by just skipping the Catalyst Wedge across the surface of the paper. I know that it looks messy, but it's supposed to be messy. It's abstract art. It's not supposed to be perfect. It's not supposed to follow a bunch of rules. It can really just be whatever you want it to be. Now that I've got the first layer of paint on this paper, I'm gonna take it off the board and store it on my drying rack, because we're going to be adding many more layers before we're ever able to actually use this piece of paper in a collage. I went ahead and grabbed some collage papers I had done previously just to show you what a finished process could look like. If we take a look, you can see where I used the black marker, where I layered and used water with transparency. And again, we're not looking for a finished piece of paper. We're just looking for a tiny little area that catches our eye and that we find interesting. Once you have lots of papers, we can move on to the next step, which is actually putting said papers onto the canvas. So we're gonna rip this in half, and then we're gonna take a paintbrush into our medium and just spread it over the area that we think we wanna put our piece of paper on. Think of this as the glue that holds everything together. Once we have the medium on the canvas, we're gonna dip our piece of paper into some water just so it goes on a lot smoother. Put it right onto the edge there. And we're gonna smooth out any air bubbles with our fingers. Your very first piece of collage paper on your canvas. How exciting. And we just repeat that process again and again and again and again until we cover the entire canvas. The method to my madness, you could say, has developed and changed a little bit because I've learned. I've learned what I like, what I don't like, but I also like to think of your classic rules when it comes to making art. So your rule of thirds, your vertical and horizontal lines. So all of those things are going through my head, but I know that if I just rely on the fundamentals, which are my color palette, and trying to just look at the canvas in small areas and not worry too much about the whole thing quite yet, I will be taking my absolute favorite brush of all time, my round dome brush, and we're gonna just put a little bit on the edge there. And I'm thinking that we want to work in this direction and kind of cascade. I like to call them confetti marks down the painting, grabbing more paint whenever we need it. I think that looks great. And there you have it. That's all there is to it. You make some collage papers, you stick them on a canvas, and then you layer on top of that. Thank you so much for coming along on this little painting journey with me. I hope it allowed you a little bit of insight into my creative mind and the type of thoughts that are going through my head while making these paintings. Either way, thank you so much for watching, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your day.